Imagine spending decades building a global agricultural powerhouse, only to watch it unravel in a matter of weeks. That's exactly what's happening right now to American farmers. The European Union, long one of the biggest buyers of U.S. corn, has just signed a trade deal that sent shockwaves through rural America. In a stunning and humiliating twist, they're walking away from U.S. corn and turning to China. Why? One word: tariffs. And those tariffs didn't come from Europe, they came straight from Washington, triggering a domino effect that's now shaking the core of U.S. agriculture. Before we get into the full story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates from this channel. This is the kind of global shift that could affect every American family, and you'll want to stay informed. Trump tariffs backfire. So here's what happened. The Trump administration imposed new tariffs, aiming to pressure the European Union on several trade fronts. The idea was to show strength, to force concessions. Instead, it backfired, spectacularly. The EU, initially posturing with threats of retaliation and a final deadline, suddenly backed down. But not in the way anyone expected. Rather than fighting back, they quietly shifted their supply chains, cutting U.S. corn out of the picture and opening the door to massive Chinese imports. It wasn't just about avoiding a fight, it was a calculated pivot. EU officials met with Chinese trade representatives weeks before the U.S. tariffs were finalized. So when Trump pulled the trigger, Europe already had a Plan B ready. And that Plan B didn't include America. The result? China steps in as a global corn supplier, and the U.S. gets pushed out of its own markets. Farmers left in the cold. For American farmers, this is more than a trade hiccup. It's a direct hit to their livelihoods. With one stroke, European demand for U.S. corn plummeted. Farmers across the Midwest are now staring at full silos, slashed prices, and mounting debt. Many of them had already been reeling from past trade wars. This latest move feels like betrayal, not by Europe, but by their own government. These are generational farms, passed down from father to son, mother to daughter. And now they're on the brink. Corn that was promised to buyers in France or Germany now sits rotting in warehouses. Equipment payments are past due, loan officers are calling, and the market shows no signs of bouncing back. Meanwhile, Chinese cargo ships are unloading fresh grain in European ports. For many, it's the first time they've questioned whether farming in America even has a future. What happened behind closed doors? The shift didn't come out of nowhere. Behind closed doors, European leaders were scrambling. Publicly, they made bold statements, saying they would never yield to Washington's pressure. But in a secret meeting at Trump's golf resort in Scotland, everything changed. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen gave in. No tariff rollbacks. No real trade protections. Instead, Europe agreed to accept a 15% tariff on most of its goods, 3 times the previous rate. Worse still, Trump's original 50% tariffs on European steel and aluminum stayed untouched. What wasn't reported is that key concessions were made in exchange for vague promises of future cooperation. And during that same weekend, Chinese envoys reportedly met with German and French officials just a few miles away. It was diplomacy in the shadows, where the real deals are made. And when the dust settled, American farmers were left completely out of the conversation. The real cost of the deal. That would be bad enough. But the real shock came in what Europe gave up in return, nearly $1.5 trillion in investment into the U.S. energy and economic sector, while their own industries got nothing in return. And amid that chaos, the European Union made a quiet yet colossal move, replacing American agricultural goods, including corn, with Chinese alternatives. Cheaper, faster, and not tangled up in political drama. European corporations are now restructuring around these new supply chains, signaling a long-term commitment to this shift, and for the US, that means these losses may not just be temporary, but permanent. Beijing steps in. That's why American farmers are furious. They've been used as pawns. Promised better trade deals. Promised protection. Instead, they've been isolated. Now, the EU is sending signals that it may shift more imports, including soybeans and wheat, to Chinese sources too. And who's stepping into the void left by the US? Beijing. Fast, aggressive, and ready to strike deals. Their diplomats are quietly touring Eastern European capitals, solidifying ties, and offering multi-year contracts that the US simply can't match anymore, not with the current instability and tariffs hanging overhead. Europe repositions itself. The optics are devastating. Europe, once tightly aligned with American producers, is now sourcing food from a country that Washington calls its biggest rival. This isn't just trade. It's a geopolitical power shift. China is offering more competitive terms, faster logistics, and none of the volatility that now seems to define American trade policy. The EU's agriculture ministers are now openly praising China's consistency, reliability, and willingness to negotiate, words once reserved for their American counterparts, now spoken in past tense. Could it have been prevented? And let's be honest, this could have been avoided. European leaders may be guilty of capitulating too easily, but the Trump administration handed them the excuse. By playing hardball without a plan for blowback, they underestimated just how easy it would be for Europe to look east. Especially when American farmers are shackled by rising production costs, climate strain, and now, a shrinking market. Policy experts warned this would happen, but their voices were drowned out in the noise of political posturing and election year headlines. Rural America reacts. Back home, farmers are protesting. Associations representing corn growers are calling emergency meetings. In Iowa, Kansas, and Nebraska, rallies are forming. Some farmers are publicly demanding a new trade strategy. Others are considering lawsuits. Because when your biggest customers vanish overnight, the damage isn't theoretical, it's financial ruin. Local banks are reporting increased loan defaults, and equipment suppliers say orders are being cancelled en masse, signs of an economic ripple effect that's already begun to hit small towns hard. Trump declares victory, but at what cost? Meanwhile, Trump is celebrating the deal as a massive win. He's framed the EU's 15% tariff acceptance and the investment promises as victories for American dominance. But many experts, including those at the Financial Times and Reuters, are calling it what it really is, a diplomatic defeat dressed up as success. Even within his own party, quiet murmurs question whether this victory is actually a long-term strategic blunder with hidden costs. A shift in global supply chains. Bank of America has already warned that Europe's long-term competitiveness may be undermined. But the same could be said for the US farm economy. Because when nations start treating China as the safer, more reliable supplier, the narrative shifts. And with it, billions in exports. Global companies are now reassessing supply chain stability, preferring countries with fewer political flare-ups and more predictable trade environments. Britain strikes a better deal. And here's where it gets even more painful. While the EU bent to Trump's terms, the United Kingdom negotiated independently and walked away with a better deal. No huge investment pledges. No tariff hikes. And no massive losses for their farmers. That's what many in the EU are now pointing to, saying, if Britain could stand its ground, why couldn't we? Even former EU officials are privately admitting the bloc may have blinked too soon. Europe erupts in protest. The anger is boiling over. In France, farmers marched on the US embassy, waving signs that called the trade deal an act of economic betrayal. In Germany, leaders are being forced to defend a decision they themselves didn't want to make. And in Spain and Italy, populist movements are using the crisis to gain traction, calling for retaliatory tariffs on US goods. Farmers across the continent are coordinating protests, using social media to spread their message globally. The US faces a domino effect. Back in the US, the ripple effect is growing. With less corn being exported, domestic prices are starting to tumble. And when prices drop, margins shrink. That means fewer jobs, tighter credit, and the potential collapse of smaller farms. Seed companies, transport firms, and even local banks tied to farm loans are feeling the strain, signaling that this is no longer just a farmer's crisis, it's a national economic dilemma. China becomes the new agricultural giant. Trump's trade play may have won him headlines, but it's losing America its markets. And this time, China isn't just watching, it's actively stepping in, offering Europe stable deals, quick logistics, and none of the political drama. The result? US farmers are out. Chinese suppliers are in. And Europe is moving on. With state-backed pricing and long-term contracts, China is building trust that Washington can no longer offer consistently. An uncertain future. This moment is a wake-up call. Not just for farmers, but for the entire American economy. When you gamble with trade, the consequences are real. Livelihoods, industries, and reputations are on the line. And now, with billions lost and trust broken, the US must decide, double down on isolation, or rebuild the bridges it's burned. Either path will come with costs, but only one offers a chance at recovery before permanent damage is done. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss what happens next. The storm isn't over. And the next chapter in this trade war is coming fast.